seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay in the got loose. Oh my God! 30, no 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
And welcome to the State of Purple podcast, live recording edition, interactive edition on all the KFA and social media channels. My name is Aj Mansour. He's Jack Day. We are here to break down a Minnesota Vikings victory in one of the most improbable ways, I guess you could say. Jack, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm kind of glad that we switched this show specifically to the morning because I feel the same way. Like I just kind of rolled out of bed probably 2 hours ago now, and I feel the same exact way I did it right after that Detroit game. Normally, you don't feel like that after a win, but it was a weird game. It was an ugly game. The Vikings kept their season alive. They might have kept some jobs alive moving for the next couple of weeks as well, but it doesn't feel good. For being a win, it didn't feel good. Like I said, I think ugly is the best way to put it.
Yeah, it just makes you feel gross, right? I mean, this is a team, the Detroit Lions, that you should have blown out of the water. You didn't. This is a game that you should have certainly won. You almost didn't. And an opportunity where you have a chance to make a move in the division, make a move towards the playoffs. One of those wins, kind of like that Cincinnati Bengals game to start the season, we just all wrote up as it was going to be a guaranteed win, and it almost wasn't. Now, Jack, before we get to some of the ramifications that might have come from this game, if it had gone differently or if it continues to go the way that it is now, let's just talk about the performance real quick, right? We had another second half with no touchdowns. We had another second half where you let a team get too many opportunities based off of silly decisions, maybe, whether it's a player's decision to cut the wrong way or not protect the ball, or a coach's decision to run or pass. Lots of debate about that. How do you feel about the way that the game played out? Might take the win and loss out of the picture. How do you feel about the Vikings' performance?
I think there's positives and negatives, as there is to any win or any loss in the NFL. And I think the biggest positive from this game, which is also a negative, and we're going to get to that when we start talking about the coaching staff, but Justin Jefferson is starting to emerge. I know he emerged last year as a superstar in this league, but Justin Jefferson, I was saying this to some friends throughout the game. I'm sitting here and I'm fairly comfortable saying Justin Jefferson has emerged as a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. I know I think Davante Adams, this was prior to the game. Davante Adams was the only higher graded wide receiver across the league. And Davante Adams, to be put in that same conversation as Davante Adams, for me, Davante Adams going into this season was my clear-cut number 1 wide receiver. And to put him into that same conversation, I think is huge, not only for this season, but for the future of this football team as well. But there's something that Ben Lieber mentioned in his little post-game video that he posted on Instagram, and I thought there was a lot to take from this. This was like the 12th game in a row now that Mike Zimmer's run defense has allowed over 100 yards rushing. And that speaks volumes to me, because it's a Mike Zimmer-led team, and that shouldn't be happening when you have a defensive-minded head coach. And it was like 108 total yards for DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. What Ben Lieber said was that was pretty much in the first half. I know they ran a little bit in the second half, but because of the game script, Detroit had to throw the ball more in the second half. And so I think they were gashing this defense. Anthony Barr was back out there. I know I was kind of expecting to see some ups and downs with Anthony Barr because it's his first game in however many months it was, but I know it was ugly, and Michael Pierce wasn't in there. There was some positives along the defensive line, seeing Everson Griffin kind of provide that spark. I tweeted something out right after his first sack, and I was like, just like everyone expected, Everson Griffin is the best free agency signing so far for the Minnesota Vikings in 2021, and that's crazy to say that when you bring in guys like Xavier Woods, Bashad Breeland, Patrick Peterson, Delvin Tomlinson. Old friend of the Minnesota Vikings, Everson Griffin, returns, and he's the one that actually kind of provides that spark instead of some of these other guys. So I think, and then going into back to the offensive side of the ball, Kirk Cousins, another game where he had to get it done, and he got it done. He got his team down there. Granted, I don't think this team should have been put in a position where they needed a game-winning drive against the Detroit Lions. You got to give credit to the Detroit Lions, though, too, because they're an 0-5 football team, but they're playing every single game extremely hard. I mean, we watched a good game last night, Indianapolis Colts against the Baltimore Ravens, and the Baltimore Ravens looked legit. Granted, Lamar Jackson kept getting chances after chances, right, but they lost on a record-breaking 66-yard field goal to the Ravens. I mean, the Detroit Lions shouldn't be looked at as this team that I think Vikings fans are so used to that, but they're starting to build something, and it doesn't really show on their record. And I think that's kind of what these national outlets are starting to talk about as well, is this coaching staff has built something, and it looks like not a great football team, but they have some of the pieces in play. And I think I don't know if Jared Goff is the answer for the Lions, but if they can get a franchise-type quarterback, they're already starting to build. They drafted a top 3 cornerback a year ago. They drafted arguably the top offensive lineman in this year's draft class. So I think they're a team to monitor as throughout the next couple of seasons go on. But all in all, it was a frustrating win. I almost just said loss because it kind of felt like a loss. But at the end of the day, the Vikings are still alive. They could bounce back next week, and we could be having a much better conversation heading into the bye. But right now, it doesn't feel that good.
Yeah, no doubt. A lot of things to cover there. I want to bounce back to a couple of them real quick, Jack. You mentioned the Justin Jefferson, Davante Adams kind of comparison. Statistically speaking, a lot of the categories, Justin is only behind Davante Adams when it comes to this last kind of calendar year, full season and change of performance since Justin entered the league. Now think about that for a second. Davante Adams is doing that with a Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the best of all time, who makes decisions for himself, whether to throw the ball. They're a much more aggressive offense than the Minnesota Vikings are. And he's putting up numbers that are requisite of that sort of a style. Justin Jefferson is putting up very similar numbers, slightly below Davante Adams' numbers, but he's doing it with Kirk Cousins, who's not a bad quarterback, but he's not Aaron Rodgers. And he's certainly not the style of offense and the style of passing game that the Green Bay Packers bring to the table. So carry that with you real quick. Flip over to the defensive side of the ball. You mentioned the struggles against the run. I think coming into this game, the Vikings were allowing about 5 yards per carry. This game, they came out another 4.5 yards per carry. The big struggle there was the run game. And Mike Zimmer, like you mentioned, his focal point on this defense is focusing in on that run, stopping the run, making the other team one-dimensional in a dimension where you can have more mistakes. You can throw a bad pass, you can have a bad catch, you can throw a tipped pass, you can throw an interception. There's just more that can go wrong with a pass play than there is a run play. They're more explosive. They're more, they can put the foot on the throat and really put a team away. But at the same time, they're going to take that chance. Stop the run, force the team to pass. That's the kind of the idea of this defense. I would love to think that Dalvin Tomlinson's going to come back and we're going to be able to stop the run. Like this cavalry's on the horizon. When Dalvin was in there, they were still allowing 5 yards per carry. So it's not like
you mean Michael Pierce, I'm assuming.
Michael Pierce. I'm so sorry. Michael Pierce. Thank you for correcting me. When Michael Pierce comes back, we like Michael Pierce, but it's not like he is a end-all be-all run stopping, going to fix this gap that we have in this defense. The opposition is hurting us. The opposition is allowing their team to give this defense a fair shot as far as going straight up. You have to play the pass. You have to play the run because you don't know what's coming. You can't make them one-dimensional. That's a big problem for this defense going forward. And Jack, I don't know if you've looked, but the schedule is only going to get more difficult with Christian McCaffrey before the bye, and then a gauntlet after the bye with those Baltimore Ravens you mentioned, the Dallas Cowboys, San Francisco, Green Bay, the Chargers. It's a tough schedule the rest of the way.
Yeah, it doesn't get easier from here on out. And the only kind of optimism I have left inside of me is along the lines of we don't know what Minnesota Vikings team is going to show up. I think they can play up to any team's level. They can also play down to any team's level. And just kind of going back one step to that run defense again, it's frustrating. Like, even if they have Michael Pierce in there, they go out and they get Dalvin Tomlinson, and everyone's like, the whole storyline is Eric Kendricks talking about these meat eaters or whatever word he used. I don't remember how he worded that, and everyone's excited. Like they're like, no one's gonna be able to run on this team, and that hasn't shown yet. And it's even more frustrating now. You have Eric Kendricks, who in my opinion should be considered for an all-pro linebacker. I know he's been an all-pro. I don't know if he's actually made a Pro Bowl, which is kind of shows the flaws in that system. And Anthony Barr, who has been a 4-time Pro Bowler. Like, Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks are two linebackers that if you can get a legitimate push from your front four on the defensive line, those two should be running around in circles and just being able to hit whoever they want, because they should be having gap after gap wide open. We have not seen that. I do want to say one thing about Eric Kendricks. That interception was insane. That was one of the coolest things I've seen, one of the better catches I've seen, and it's coming from a middle linebacker. It's not coming from a star wide receiver or tight end. It's coming from someone who traditionally these guys aren't supposed to be able to catch. But Eric Kendricks continues to prove that he is elite in the pass coverage game.
Right, and we continue to see things like that from him. I mean, that's not the only kind of interception he's made. That one was fantastic. But to see that there are pieces here, right? This defense isn't bad. They're not devoid of talent, but they're just, something is not clicking. And whether it is up front, whether it's in the middle, whatever, whether it's scheming, Mike Zimmer has flat out said, I had people in the wrong scheme a couple times already this season. Now, that happens to every coach every game. Maybe he's just sharing it, and others don't necessarily talk about their shortcomings. But there is this weird situation where just something's not clicking, something's not going right, and they need to figure it out quickly. Now, I guess there's a couple positives that we could pull from this game. Greg Joseph, obviously, he hit a career-long 54-yarder early in the game, missed a 49-yarder. It was just weird. Like, he booms that 54-yarder and then leaves that 49-yarder short. It was on, but he kicked it differently. I mean, you've heard the notion of a kicker kicks more of a line drive when it's a long field goal to give it a little more distance. This was not that kind of a kick. It's like he thought this was in the range of the normal style of kick, and it clearly wasn't. But then he goes back and he kicks the game-winning field goal at the end there, Jack. That had to feel good to see.
Yeah, it did feel good to see. And regardless of the circumstances of the game, as frustrated as Vikings fans probably were throughout that game, you have to feel good for a guy like that who, after that Arizona game, I mean, we talk about this. This could be a 3-2 football game if he made that kick. Now he comes through in a game that got ugly, got out of hand. The defense was playing fairly well outside of the run coverage. They were playing fairly well up until that last series where they just marched right down the field, had the weird Alexander Madison fumble. The Vikings almost lost 2 games because of a running back fumble late in the game. But yeah, it feels good. Just, it's a feel-good story for him after what he's been through this season. And it's starting to pay off for what Mike Zimmer did. It was like Mike Zimmer with Daniel Carlson a couple of years ago when he had that ugly game against the Packers. He was out the door. And Mike Zimmer, instead, he's like, Greg Joseph has been good in practice. We still have faith in him. I think there's a lot of support from his teammates as well. And it paid off. And I think the 49-yarder was a weird instance. I think, kind of going back to what you said, it seemed like almost it was more of a chip shot where he probably just kind of got underneath the ball more than he was trying to do. Like you said, I think they try to hit up higher on the ball for those longer field goals. And he wasn't worried about it for that 54, 55-yard or whatever it was to win at the end of regulation. And just a feel-good story. It was especially going around the league and watching kickers. If Vikings fans tuned into that Cincinnati Green Bay game after that, it was like a whole fiasco of watching miss kick after miss kick, and then obviously it has to end up in the Packers' favor and get it back to Crosby hitting the game winner. But it was a weird week for kickers across the league, and when it was a weird week for kickers across the league, somehow the Minnesota Vikings weren't involved with that.
Sort of. I mean, they had the one.
Yeah.
Not in a devastating fashion. Like even the Colts last night had a game-winning field goal lined up, and they ended up missing.
And they had one blocked too, which I think would have.
He was having a weird night, some sort of injury. Even I think that they were working through. But yeah, so Kirk Cousins. I mean, for the first time, then you're looking for another positive to pull from this game. For the first time, basically, as long as he's been quarterback of this team, Kirk Cousins is not receiving blame for the struggles that this team is seeing. He has. Had 3 good games and 2 games that were mediocre. I would even say last week was probably a bad game. 2 weeks ago, excuse me. The
Cleveland.
The Cleveland game was probably a bad game for Kirk. This last week against the Lions was probably a nondescript game, but when it mattered most, that 2-minute drive for the 3rd time this season, he put his team in a position to win the game or extend the game into overtime. In this instance, he put them in a position to win it. Mike Zimmer kind of jokingly said, maybe we need to go with 2-minute no huddle the entire game. there might be something to that. there might be a little bit something there, but the principles that come with a 2-minute drive are maybe what they need to look at a little bit more, because that is opening up the offense. It's taking chunks of yards, understanding where you are in the game. In theory, if you're running a 2-minute offense stylized, you should have more opportunities, because you don't have to worry about getting to the sidelines if you're doing it early in the game, right? Because the clock is not your enemy. So you have an opportunity to pass the ball across the middle. You don't have to worry about timeouts. You don't have to worry about getting out of bounds. But being that aggressive like that has worked for this team. They really need to find a way to carry some of that 2-minute attitude, that 2-minute approach into the other 58 minutes of the game.
Yeah, and it's entertaining too. Like I said, I think half the fan base, this is back-to-back weeks where, one, the Boo Birds have been out when the offense has left the field multiple times. And two, I wasn't at this game, but I was at the previous one, and I saw Meat Sauce tweeted something about this. This is back-to-back games where it sounds like paper airplanes are flying like crazy throughout that stadium. And it's not entertaining. This is a new... I mean, you go out, we had this conversation at the beginning of the year, and we were looking at the schedule, talking about all of these young quarterbacks and kind of the style that they bring. Look at what Justin Herbert is doing. Granted, I don't know if the Los Angeles Chargers have like a true traditional fan base in Los Angeles, but they're entertaining. They can sling the ball. And that game blew me away, because I wasn't expecting the Browns to put up 40-plus points either. And it was crazy seeing that after they just put up 14 against the Vikings. But
and on the flip side too, their defense played great against us, and they were hemorrhaging points against the Chargers. And
what the Chargers do traditionally, they let Justin Herbert sling it. That first drive when Kirk Cousins was slinging it all over that defense, it seemed to be working, and then they completely went away from that script. And this is probably a good transition for us to kind of talk about some of these coaching things. And I don't know, everyone out there is kind of saying, hey, Mike Zimmer he has Clint Kubiak on this super short leash. I don't know if that's the case. I just think this was bound to happen with an offensive coordinator that hasn't called plays yet in the NFL. Like, it seems like, I don't think it's Mike Zimmer telling him to run plays where Kirk Cousins acts like a snap goes over his head and it's a direct snap to Alexander Mattison on third down. Like, I don't think that's a Mike Zimmer thing. I think there's issues within that offensive room, and it shows. And I saw a tweet about this as well. Like, Mike Zimmer, traditionally, if they have these younger guys in, they bring in I don't know what their titles are, but they always seem to bring in like some senior advisor. They do it on defense. They've done it on offense. I think Clint Kubiak is kind of missing what Gary Kubiak, his father, could be doing for him and kind of helping him out, because he doesn't have anyone up there. I'm sure there's people up there with him in the booth, but he's kind of going at this solo, making play calls, and it's not working. And when stuff is working, it just seems like he tends to go away from that. Like, I'm sure there's a little bit of both when it comes to Mike Zimmer wanting to be this run-first football team, establish the run and play solid defense. But to what extent can that limit what Kubiak is doing? Like, Kubiak should still have free reign of offense, in my opinion. And if that's not the case, then there's bigger issues within that organization already. But if he does have that ability to kind of call what he wants to call, I think he's just struggling, and it's frustrating to see just feeding Alexander Mattison. This was like the same game plan the Vikings would have had if they had a healthy Dalvin Cook, I think. And they put Alexander Mattison in there and said, hey, you're going to play the Dalvin Cook role. And we saw him do that fine against, Seattle, when he missed that game. He filled in admirably for Dalvin Cook, but I don't think he's the same back that Dalvin Cook is. And if I'm taking anything away from these games, we have to just find a better balance between that. We can't, one, it's going to be better for Dalvin Cook's health if you can get him less touches and make the touches he gets more efficient. And I think, Kirk Cousins has been slinging it, and we go back to Justin Jefferson. No one's been able to cover Justin Jefferson this year. Right. And for some reason, he had, I think it was 107 yards, 105 yards in the first half on 5 catches. He didn't catch a ball until like the fourth quarter. It felt like forever, because they were doing these drives where it was like, we're going to do that run play to Alexander Mattison on third down, or we're going to do some weird screenplay that the Vikings have built their franchise on screenplays in the past, but they're doing them differently. They're not doing them like, I remember that screen. There's one that sticks in my head last year in Lambeau where they have the offensive line to have athleticism and get out in front of a guy like Alexander Madison, and they're doing it differently. I want them to get back to their roots in the screen game, and then they can't be afraid to air it out. Adam Thielen had 3 total targets. You have one of the top wide receiver tandems. It was a weird game with Thielen. He had that drop too that was extremely.
There was one moment too where I even tweeted it out because he was on the sidelines being looked at by the trainer, and at the moment the trainers took his helmet away. That can mean a bunch of different things, right? That could mean that they're going to get it off to the equipment people to fix something. That could mean that they're taking it away to protect him from wanting to go back in. Ultimately, I watched him for the next drive scramble because they took his helmet trying to find it. He found it, and he was out there that next drive. But there's just something that's not right with Adam right now. He's never been slowed down by the opposition scheming him, right? Especially with Justin Jefferson going, crazy on the other side. They're going to probably play those two as straight up as they possibly can, giving one an opportunity here and the other an opportunity there. There's just nothing for Adam.
Yeah, and you said that perfectly. Like with Justin Jefferson starting to show strides and being elite at being like a deep threat as well, not just these crossers that he's been killing people with as well. That should open this offense wide up for guys like Adam Thielen. KJ Osborne has emerged as a legitimate wide receiver as well. And Tyler Conklin has shown that he can be a good tight end. What's going to happen in 2022 when Irv Smith Jr. is healthy and we have all these weapons and we continue to just try to establish the run? I don't think it's going to work. There's too many mouths to be fed on this offense right now, and just to force feed one of them in Dalvin Cook. One, like I just said, he's injury prone. We know that. We know Dalvin Cook is one of the most talented running backs in the National Football League, but that's when he's healthy, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And I just think if you can find that balance, it's going to help this offense so much more, and it's going to be able to add points on the board. And hopefully when they figure that point, or that if they get that figured out, hopefully it can kind of merge together, because we're yet to see a game where the defense puts a good display on and the offense does. It's like either vice versa. That's how it's been since Kirk Cousins arrived in Minnesota. That needs to change if this team and this fan base even wants to mention the word playoffs ever again for this team.
Absolutely. I have a question from the chat I'm going to pull up here. Joshua, who is watching on Twitch right now, wants to know, when do we think Daresaw will be the full-time starter? This last week, Jack, he kind of rotated reps or rotated drives, let's say, with Rashad Hill. The week before, he was in one play. I think he played one snap on the field goal unit. But Christian Daresaw, what do you think we can expect from him this week against Carolina?
I think I have 2 different answers. There's an answer for when I expect him to fully take over that role, and then there's an answer for when I think he should take over that role, because I think he should be the starter at left tackle against Carolina, and it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. This front office has a weird, I don't want to say obsession, but they have this weird deal going with Rashad Hill. Like after Rashad Hill got blown back, I mean, Detroit's front four was nothing spectacular, and Rashad Hill got blown back, gave up a sack on Kirk Cousins, and after that, it's like, what are we doing here? The Vikings drafted a first-round pick who Christian Daresaw wouldn't have been a surprise if they would have taken him at that 14th selection. They were able to trade back, gather some other picks, more developmental guys, but he's a first-round pick. The first-round picks should be ready. I know he's missed out on a lot of the football activities, but they said they were trying to get him at the football speed. What better way to do that than throw him out there? And they did throw him out there. I was happy to see him out there, but just the weird rotation, that's got to create like a weird feeling within that locker room too. I don't know if Christian Daresaw and Rashad Hill have anything against each other. I probably shouldn't say that, but it's like we flip-flop. That's not something that is normal at this level. I feel like maybe in college you'll see that. You'll see college teams flip-flop quarterbacks every once in a while, and that's just weird to me. I don't think that's a recipe for success. So personally, I think Christian Daresaw should be named the starter moving forward. He still has it wasn't perfect by any means, but I think the PFF grades came out and he graded out like 1 point higher than Rashad Hill. Rashad Hill has been in the league for 6, 7, 8 years now. Right. He's a rookie, and he just outperformed. It's a stretch.
No experience.
Yes, right? It's a stretch to say that he outperformed him. But I mean, and I know you tweeted something out about this right after it happened, so I can let you get some thoughts in here too. But he goes in, and the next play was like an 11-yard run, and that was entertaining to see, just because it went right to the left. And there was a couple plays like that. I think there was a couple solid plays in pass protection as well. So I think the best way to get him ready to go is to ramp up practice, get him 100%, get him repping with the ones. And I mean, Everson Griffin put on a clinic against Penei Sewell. Throw Everson Griffin at him and let Everson Griffin do all of his maneuvers, his spin moves, and just get him ready to go and get him out on the football field on Sundays, because I think that'll be the best thing for this team moving forward.
Now, it's always fun to have to listen to the KFAN broadcast during the football game, because you have Ben Lieber, Pete Bursich, both former players, Bursich a former coach as well. So they have a lot of good insight. And on that Daresaw run, the first play that he got in, they ran to the left side and got 11 yards. Ben noted that, hey, this is cool, this is exciting, it's fun to see, but Daresaw got blown up on that play. Like, it wasn't necessarily his doing that led to the 11-yard. It was just a good play call at the right moment and had an opportunity there. That being said, they also were talking about, Ben and Pete talking about football shape. And I think even Greg Coleman chimed in on this one, and how you can't get in football shape, especially for an offensive lineman, by jogging on the sidelines at practice or running miles and miles to get your body in shape. It's a different sort of thing. We heard this from Anthony Barr. Getting your legs underneath you, depending on what position you are, especially for an offensive lineman, who your core, your trunk, your base is one of the most important things you can have, is something you can't necessarily practice. You can get stronger in the weight room, but you can't practice stance and exactly how you're going to get worn out and tired and build that stamina unless you're on the football field. So get him out there. He should hopefully take every rep in practice this week. I know that they're not super high contact reps, but get his body moving that way. I agree with you. I think he should this week. I think this was the ramp up, right? We're going to ramp him up. I didn't see the snap count, but it was roughly 50-50, maybe 60-40 in favor of Rashad Hill this last week. Flip that script. Get Daresaw at least the majority of those reps, if not all of them, and throw his feet to the fire. I mean, see what you can do. Every defense in the NFL is dangerous, but Carolina is not necessarily known for their crazy edge rushers. They're a 3-4 scheme, right? So it might be a little different for him to have that exposure. Maybe that's not how you want to enter the league, but at the same time, just to get his feet wet, to get his body going, you need to get him out there. And if you're looking at the PFF rankings and you don't think that there's a gigantic drop off from Hill to Daresaw, even at this point, start getting this guy experience. Get him some film to look at during the bye week. So he has 2 weeks then to look at what he did, not what Rashad Hill did, not what the opposition did, but what he did or didn't do in this game against the Carolina Panthers. So I do think it's important to get him in there. Jack, let's close out real quick with a quick conversation on the coaching staff. There are mixed thoughts based off of the outcome of this game, whether or not the made field goal, the 37-second drive to get in field goal position, saved Mike Zimmer's job. We'll never know, right? We'll never know the answer to that question, so I don't need to even put you in there and get your opinion on that. What I want to know is, do you think that the win of this game changes anything for the long-term outcome of the future for this coach? When I don't think they're going to fire him during the season. So do you think that this extra win, the way that they won it, should it feel good at all?
I don't think so. I think long term, I agree with you. I don't think this is going to be an in-season type firing, because one, I don't know what's out there for coaches, and two, it's hard to speculate on stuff like that. But I think the plan was going into this season was to give Zimmer a full season to prove to the Wilfs if he can make some sort of playoff run. If they miss the playoffs, if they make a wild card game and get blown out, or even if they win a wild card game and get blown out in the divisional round, I'm not going to be surprised if this is Mike Zimmer's last year in Minnesota. It's been going on. I think Mike Zimmer is a great coach. I've been a fan of his since he's gotten here. He's done some great things for Minnesota, but since Kirk Cousins has arrived, the Minnesota Vikings have one playoff game against the New Orleans Saints, and that took a fairly heroic drive out of Kirk Cousins. And I know that everyone in the chat's going to love that if I say that, but it took an overtime win with a beautifully thrown ball to Adam Thielen, and then maybe a push off from Kyle Rudolph. So other than that, though, ever since the second half of that Saints game in 2017, or I guess it would have been 2018, the defense hasn't been there. when the defense is there, the offense doesn't show up. I mean, it was ever since that moment, like the defense and a couple questionable throws by Case Keenum kind of kept the Saints in that game. It should not have been a Minneapolis Miracle. Granted, it was probably more fun that way for everyone in the state of Minnesota. But ever since that moment, you go out to Philadelphia, and I just said that extremely weird, Philadelphia, and you get blown out 38-7. Since that moment, this team, it hasn't had that life. That defense in 2017, I think they keep trying to get a similar style of defense back in to build this team up and hopefully balance out the offense and the defense. That's yet to happen. And there's still a lot of season left for that to happen. Maybe things start changing, or they start to change around. Maybe they go on some special win streak here, which I am not going to get my hopes up for because you just mentioned what the schedule looks like. But maybe that does happen. If that happens, I think we could be having a different conversation like 3-4 weeks down the road. But until then, right now, this win, I don't think it changes anything one way or the other. Mike Zimmer, he's still on the hot seat. I think maybe it made his seat a little bit less hotter, but at the end of the day, he's still sitting there. I think it's still starting to build up, and it's got to be getting pretty hot at this point.
We'll close out, Jack, with 2 rapid-fire questions from the chat. Slinksy wants to know if the Chiefs are still Super Bowl favorites.
That is an interesting thing to bring up. I think any team with Patrick Mahomes on it, I think you can still throw in as Super Bowl favorites, but they're losing ground to a Chargers team that Justin Herbert is starting to look like a potential MVP candidate. I think there's teams in the NFC that should be favored over them. I think Dallas is playing very well right now. I think Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, Tom Brady just did something that he has never done in his career as a 44-year-old, throwing for, I think it was 5 touchdowns and 400+ yards. That team still looks like it could be a team to beat. And there's the Buffalo Bills, too, after putting on that display, I think might be the favorites in the AFC right now. So right now, I think it's not a bad bet. If they start slipping down and you get some good odds, I wouldn't necessarily rule them out. But that defense, it looks ugly. And I just don't know if Patrick Mahomes, even though I think he's a guaranteed first ballot Hall of Famer already and he's in his 4th season, I don't know if he's going to be able to overcome that poor defensive play.
Right, and the key word there is favorites, right? They're Super Bowl contenders. Any team with Patrick Mahomes is a Super Bowl contender. That said, they had a lot of injuries this last week that could factor in for the upcoming slate that they have. And I would say that the Buffalo Bills are the favorites presently based on the display that they put out there. Last one here for you, Jack, and I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. The question from the chat is, if Zimmer is gone, Spielman is probably gone as well, correct? I think that is a yes. So I'm going to rephrase this. Is there a scenario where one of them is fired and the other stays? And if so, who do you think would be the one to stay and who do you think would be the one to go?
If that scenario plays out right now, I think it would be Zimmer getting fired and Spielman staying.
Because I think the opposite.
So this is something, and me being more into, like, the draft is my favorite time of year, which I love football obviously too, but getting to the draft, I love that time of year. And people can throw this in my face, like the 2021 draft class not doing anything, and I didn't expect it to do anything at this point, other than Christian Daresaw and maybe a Wyatt Davis. But a lot of the guys they took were developmental guys, and I have a lot of respect for the scouting personnel that Rick Spielman has under him, and they've brought in some. I saw a tweet this weekend, and I know Rick Spielman hasn't been perfect. He's missed on some big draft picks. He's missed on a lot of first rounders, but people are saying it was along the lines of it was one pick that they had being a hit, and I don't remember who it was, but they're like, oh, he drafted. It was Stephon Diggs, a 5th-round wide receiver. They're like, oh, he hit on wide receiver Stephon Diggs. That's his only good thing that he's done. It's like, they hit on Justin Jefferson. I'm ready to say he's a hit. Granted, he's a first rounder, and they've struggled with that. I don't really think it's fair to say that Jeff Gladney was a bust, because Jeff Gladney was just a knucklehead and got himself into some trouble. But you have to look at more than just the first round and more than just like these 5th, 6th, 7th rounders. Yes, Rick Spielman loves his 7th rounders, but look at what Rick Spielman has done with this track record in the 2nd round and 3rd round. Eric Kendricks, Daniil Hunter, Irv Smith Jr., Delvin Cook. I mean, he's brought in a lot of good talent, and I think that I don't know. I'm interested to hear your perspective on this, because I think Rick Spielman has done a lot of good for this team, and there's just weird scenarios where it's like, I don't know if the offensive line in particular, is the offensive line, do they have the right coaching personnel to take highly recruited talent and turn them into NFL caliber players. I don't know. I don't know if we've necessarily seen that, but people are like, well, Rick Spielman doesn't spend his time on offensive linemen. That's not true. We have a left tackle that's a first round pick, a center that's a first round pick, a guard and a right tackle that were both second round picks. And then I think Ali Udo was an undrafted guy, but they drafted a third rounder in Wyatt Davis. So they've tried to build that up, and maybe he is just missing on those picks, but I think some of it comes down to the offensive philosophy as well.
Yeah. So my quick thoughts are it's time for a shakeup of some sort. And if you're looking for a shakeup just to reshuffle the deck, you can do a couple different things. You can shake up everything, and you can fire a head coach and a general manager and start from scratch, completely new. There's obviously people that want that. You could fire the head coach and get a different scheme in, or you could fire a general manager and have a different thought process behind the scenes. The way I look at it, and I think that both of them are on the hot seat. So it's not like I'm saying that Zimmer's safe and Spielman is on the hot seat. But if one of them were to go, I think that I have more faith in Mike Zimmer working with the players that he is given from a different mindset, a different train of thought from the upper management than I do with Rick Spielman doing so for a new head coach or giving him the players. I think we've seen a longer track record with Rick Spielman. There's been wins, there's been losses, but if there is just time for a shakeup, Mike Zimmer is dealing with the cards that he has been dealt. Sometimes injuries factor into that. Nobody can predict that, right? The Daresaw situation so far this season, nobody can predict that. But if we're looking at the opportunity to do some of these things as far as players to draft, focal points to draft, as soon as we hang up here, I have a post I'm going to push up, and it'll be ready if you're listening to this podcast. You can find it on Twitter at AJKFAN. That kind of breaks down the, let's call them panic trades that this team has made over the last 5 or 6 years, going back to Sam Bradford, going back to Kari Vedvik, going back to, these opportunities where something happens right before the season and maybe we overreact and trade away assets in the draft that potentially could have helped us build an offensive line that's better for Kirk Cousins today, get a different personnel situation based off of what we had today. Now that goes both ways, right? I'm not fooling anybody. I'm not foolish. I'm not dumb. It could go both ways, but there's a first round pick, a second round pick, a couple fourth round picks, and a fifth round pick just in the last 5 years that have been traded away for players that have no value to this team right now. I'm counting Chris Herndon as no value. I don't think it's going to come. But the Bradford trade, the Vedvik trade, the Yannick Ngakoue trade, all of those situations ended up with basically a net zero for this team. And they don't have anything to show from it. So, those pieces could have helped build this team. They could have also been missed draft picks. I get that. But I think that if there was one to be shuffled, if a new general manager came in with a new philosophy in building a team, I trust Mike Zimmer to be maybe the one to coach that team if they build it, if that makes sense. So, Jack, let's close out there. One quick reminder, if you are a fan of the Power Trip Morning Show, your Rise Waiting and Watching World Tour t-shirt is still available. This is on sale for this week only. You can head to KFAN.com and find that now if you want to grab that. Otherwise, we'll sign off for today from the State of Purple podcast. Oops, where is it? Boom, there we go. For Jack Day, I'm Aj Mansour. This is the State of Purple podcast on KFAN.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side.